Councillor Ray Wootton, Chairman and Vice Chairman Councillor Breda Griffin. Welcome to the Constitution Committee meeting. I'd also like to welcome all officers and Cabinet members to this meeting. If you wish to ask a question, please indicate to the Vice Chairman, Councillor Breda Griffin. This meeting will be recorded and the recordings retained in accordance with the Council's document retention policy. We now move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. Any apologies, Lucy?
Chairman, I haven't been advised of any apologies, but Councillor Baxter and Councillor Fellows are absent currently.
Right, if Councillor Baxter does turn up, but that'll be fine. If not, I'll mark his apologies down. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations to declare? Bear in mind that you only need to declare a pecuniary interest. Any declarations to declare? No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March. I'll go through them for accuracy only, and they're on page 3 onwards. Page 4, I think, David, Councillor Bellamy, you have a question there.
Yeah, just a discrepancy. On where it says concern was expressed by some members about the short notice to defer the item, comments were at the very end. It says any points made during the meetings. This is I'm assuming this is referring to the meetings that the planning committee had regarding the review. It says any meetings were reflected in the report. Well, they weren't reflected in the report, otherwise we wouldn't have deferred it. So I think that's just, like I say, it should really say that weren't reflected in the report, and
that's fine.
Which was obviously the reason for the deferment.
We'll make sure that gets amended.
Yeah, thank you.
Page 5 and page 6, I have a correction there on the paragraph which has got contained, and it's got contained twice, so we need to take one of those out, Lucy. Page 7 and page 8. I propose that there are a true record of the meeting held on 7th of March. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Vice Chairman. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Any abstentions? No. Noted. Thank you very much indeed. So they are carried. They are a true record of the meeting held on the 7th of March. We'll move on to item 4, updates from the previous meeting on page 11. I think we've got that later on in the meeting, where we're having an extra meeting to cover some extra articles for the Constitution. That's correct, isn't it, Graham? Thank you. So move on now to the substantive agenda item, which is number 5, Planning Services Review, pages 13 to 31. And may I welcome Councillor Helen Crawford, Chairman of the Planning Committee, who is attending today. So if I go over now to Emma Whittaker to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will all be aware, there was a review into the planning process, the planning team and the committee in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And one of the elements that came out of that was a suggestion that we looked at the Constitution and looked at the powers that are delegated to officers versus the planning committee. As a result of that, a lot of work had gone on in terms of workshops between officers, between members, to look at some of the detail. We had 2 informal planning committees late last year to look at some of the detail, and what's in front of you today is the output of those informal committees, in particular the latter committee. It's a series of amendments that are proposed to the Constitution in terms of specifically what's delegated and what needs to come to planning committee. There's also a protocol, which is Appendix B, which sets out some of the guidance for members around how the Constitution should work, about how site visits should be carried out, procedure notable points in terms of the running of the planning committee. Happy to answer questions. I think members, and I've certainly Councillor Crawford and Councillor Bellamy were at those informal committee meetings. I'm sure they'd be delighted to say something if necessary. But I think we've got a good balance here of putting the control in the planning committee in terms of what it wants to see, rather than having lots of applications automatically being reported to committee for the sake of it. Happy to take any questions or to go through the detail, Chairman, if you thought that was the most appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I open up to members, welcome Councillor Fellows, who are going to start, so you haven't missed much.
Apologies, Chair, it was traffic.
Yes, I understand it. Welcome again to Councillor Helen Crawford, Chairman of the Planning Committee. Councillor Crawford, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much, Chairman. I probably joined the committee halfway through the review and consultation. We had the consultation and review from Creators, and I believe that there were great concerns that things may change and not necessarily for the better. At the end of the day, you take what you think are the right points from any consultation. We had as a committee frank, fair and open discussions. Indeed, Chairman, your predecessor, Councillor Mark Whittington, came to the last meeting and said that this is exactly how the process should be, and was very happy how the meeting had gone. And I'm sure he would be happy to verify this, as I see he's here today. With the help and guidance from our new Assistant Director of Planning, Emma Whitaker, we made headway, and I believe that we have an excellent constitution for planning decisions making for the future. I would like to express my great thanks to Emma for getting where we are today. It lays everything out clearly for everyone. I also feel that if all members attended planning training, it would be beneficial so they would understand the process better to help their residents. I would also like to thank the Planning Committee for all their input into this report as well. And as a result, changes have been made to the original draft document. Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to echo the comments that Councillor Crawford's just made. I observed that the first meeting, the first special meeting of the Planning Committee to discuss this on the YouTube channel, because I couldn't attend in person. I then attended the second one in person, and for me, it was a model example of how a consultation process between officers and a committee should take place. And as I intimated to Councillor Crawford, that I was extremely happy with the way it went through, and also as a former chairman of this committee, as I say, just echo the point. It was a model example of how to do a consultation between officers and members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Whittington. Councillor Baxter, welcome to the committee. We didn't start until 22 because we understand you were stuck in traffic.
Yeah,
I'm now going to open up to members of the committee. Are there any members who wish to speak on this particular item? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for delaying the start of the meeting for me. You've certainly made good progress in the 10 minutes that's happened, and so I've missed the introductions and so on. Also missed an opportunity to speak about the minutes of the previous meeting, so I might choose to bring those up later on. On this particular issue, I've been involved in most of the meetings along the way, the workshops, the meetings, the secret meetings, the public meetings with no minutes, and I still have problems with what has happened or what is being presented before us. I've made a list on the spare page in this agenda. Here we are. So I'll go through them if I might. There are some issues with capitalisations. For example, conservation area is not consistently capitalised. In one place it's a big C, big A, in another case it's lowercase. I don't know if we have a protocol for things like listed building consent, whether it's capitalised or not, but certainly it should be consistent the whole way through. There are some typos in the report. For example, where it says without prejudice, I probably can find the specific area where, it's halfway down page 21 at the very end of paragraph 2.12, it says on a without prejudice basis. That without prejudice should either be in italics or in a single quote. There's also a very relevant comma missing in paragraph 2.6. In one place, it refers to immediate family. In another area, it mentions immediate relative. What's the difference between an immediate family member and an immediate relative? And also, is there a legal definition? For example, if somebody has an ex-spouse, is that person seen as a immediate family or relative? If somebody is cohabiting, is that an immediate family or relative? And are the relatives of the cohabitee immediate family or relative? How is this defined in law, and or how is this defined by SKDC? Should I stop there or do you want the whole lot all at one go?
Have you got many? Right, we'll stop there. Emma, are you able to answer that question particular to the immediate families or relatives?
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm not sure if Graham Watts would like to chip in as well in terms of the wider sort of constitution policies, but I think you have to apply a degree of common sense. This is about ensuring that we are transparent in our decision making, and that we bring applications to planning committee if there is a concern that there could be any sort of prejudicial influence in the background. So normally you would take it to be your immediate family members that you are cohabiting with. But I would say in any particular instance, if somebody felt that there was an issue, then we would look at it and seek advice from the monitoring officer. Graham, did you want to chip in with anything else, or has that covered everything?
Chairman, just in relation to the capitalisation, that's something that one of the key things about the Constitution is how inconsistent it is. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking to review once we've got a document in its entirety that we can present to full council. We'll make sure that there's consistency in relation to those aspects.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, please continue, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. It's not consistent within itself. At the top of top of page 21, the first bullet point says small C conservation area, and the second paragraph says big C conservation area. That's my point. And with regard to the immediate family, I would welcome clarification. I had a major falling out with another member in my ward because I drew attention to the fact that his daughter had put in an application and hadn't mentioned her relationship to a member of the council. And at the time I was told it was only immediate family, it was only spouses that this legislation related to. And it was a needless question, but because of the vagaries within the planning department at the time. So I welcome the clearing up of it. In paragraph 2.6, which is paragraph 6 on page 20, we use a single paragraph to talk about applications submitted by a councillor or where a councillor lives in the adjoining property or a property opposite. However, in paragraphs 7 and 8, or 2.7 and 2.8, we split that out. So paragraph 2.7 is the applicant is a member of staff, and paragraph 8 is where a member of staff lives next door or whatever. I think that should be split out in paragraph 6, because certainly it's difficult with all the parentheses to understand what paragraph 2.6 is saying, and 2.7 and 2.8 are much clearer. Where we say the adjoining, the adjoining property, surely we mean an adjoining property. If we say in paragraph 2.6, where a district councillor lives in the adjoining property, it implies that there is only one adjoining property, where there could be 4 or more, either side and back and front. It says that again somewhere else. Somewhere else within it, it talks about. It says it in 2.2 as well, where a councillor from that ward or the adjoining ward. Well, most wards have more than one adjoining ward. And what if a councillor doesn't live in the adjoining property, but has a business or an allotment or some other vested interest in the adjoining property? Speaking hypothetically, if somebody wants to build a house next to a set of allotments, are we interested in whether or not the allotment is owned? I think I'm making myself clear. I'm saying that just because you don't live in a property doesn't mean you don't have an interest in it. You might own it, you might work in it, you might have whatever else, and that's not clear. What status have consultants? Because we've talked about staff within the authority in paragraph 2.7. Staff within the authority, does that, I think we mean staff employed by the authority, because what is the status of consultants? What is the status of people who work for subsidiary organisations like Leisure SK or Environment SK or any of the other family of SKs? What about applications from county council? Do we bring applications from county council? Because certainly there's a site within my ward where the county council want to do an application, and I think that we should be looking at it as a council. So I've then got one big conversation, which is probably a separate conversation. So I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on what I've said so far.
Your questions are really welcome, Councillor Baxter. Have you not thought about approaching the planning officer before the meeting to try and get some clarification or some answers to your questions before coming here today?
I've been to every one of the workshops, and I've sat through hours and hours of this stuff. And frankly, to say that it's for me to bring it back when, I mean, I was going to ask under the minutes of the previous meeting, there was a question.
We've moved on from there.
Well, I'm going to move back to there because it's relevant to this particular point on the agenda.
I've moved on.
And the point is,
I've moved on.
Well, sorry, I thought this was a democratic meeting where people would come to the meeting and ask questions about items on the agenda, not one where we sweep it under the carpet as soon as we can get away with it.
There's no sweeping under the carpet.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead with my question then, please.
I have moved on. I'm on this item on the agenda.
Right.
Thank
So, does anyone want to come back to the questions I've asked so far?
Who could answer that question? Emma?
Thank you. I've made notes, so hopefully I'll cover every point. In relation to para 2.6 of Appendix A, which is where it references development district councillors in a single paragraph, and you've got employees listed as 2. It's actually been drafted both ways and changed. It really doesn't make any difference. If members prefer it and think it reads better to have that listed as 2 separate paragraphs, it makes no odds. It's the same thing. It just whatever's easiest for interpretation. In terms of the adjoining property, we can again make sure that is clarified, but it means an adjoining property, the adjoining property, whichever is the appropriate. I think again, it's just about ensuring that there is transparency in the decision-making process. And if you have a councillor who may have a prejudicial influence or an influence on the decision-making process, we need to be clear and transparent. And the same for the ward. In terms of a district councillor owning or working, if members wanted to add that clarification in, then that's absolutely fine. What I would say is we do have a monitoring officer, and the whole purpose of that is if anybody thinks that they may have a personal or prejudicial interest in an application, then that's something they can come and discuss with the monitoring officer or myself, and we'll clarify. And I'd always err on the side of caution if there was concern that there may be some lack of transparency in the decision-making process. In terms of consultants are engaged by the council, they're not employees of the council. Again, it is around the decision-making process being transparent. It's probably a question for the monitoring officer on an as and when basis. The Constitution obviously sets out everything, but there's always going to be the odd occasion where it's not going to quite cater for that particular scenario. So I would say if there's a particular application where someone has got concerns, again, discuss it with the monitoring officer and myself, and we can give some guidance around that particular issue. In terms of applications from Lincolnshire County Council, that's not something that, from memory, was particularly discussed at the Planning Committee. This is a document about where who's got delegated powers to respond on behalf of the of the council, both in terms of decision-making process. In terms of county applications, we're not the decision-making body, we are a consultee. So it's about finding the most appropriate decision-making body for that response to be sent back to Lincolnshire County Council. I see no reason why they shouldn't be delegated to officers, but clearly if we do have a particular controversial applications, an application of a significant scale, then it may well be appropriate that it does go to a planning committee or somewhere else within the district. But I think, again, that's probably best placed for an as and when basis, depending on the situation. And again, a councillor could actually request that application to come to planning committee and have a conversation at the time. But if members felt that it needed to go in, then that's your decision. Thank you. I think that covered everything.
Thank you, Emma. Before we go back to Councillor Baxter, members of the committee, do you have any comments regarding what Emma has said? Because I'm happy with the explanation. None? No, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. The biggest threat from this this presentation or this amendment to the Constitution is in paragraph 2.2 or paragraph 1 on page 19. Which changes, it actually clips the wings of councillors to affect the process. Currently, any councillor can call in any application across the authority. People rarely do. I can only think of one or maybe two occasions where it's happened. But this is saying that you can only call in where a councillor from that ward or the adjoining ward has requested the call in. This is unnecessary. It's not a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's solving a problem that doesn't exist. And also it is problematic in itself because we've got some wards where the adjoining ward, where the representative in the adjoining ward is the spouse of the person in the initial ward. It's absolutely needless to have this restriction. And it means that I'm here to represent residents from the whole of South Kesteven. And if people in Peascliff and Ridgeway or Grantham or Bourne can't find representation via their local councillor, and that might not necessarily be the councillor's fault, I should be able to represent the views of people from across the district. Secondly, within that paragraph, it requires agreement of the chairman of the planning committee. So the chairman of the planning committee basically has a veto on what goes to the committee. That's not healthy. And again, if it's after the 21-day period, it needs the chairman and the vice chairman have a veto of what goes to the committee. That's not healthy. So I'm not going to vote for any of this, but mostly because of this particular phrasing. If you took out this limitation of where the councillors took out this new limitation of the adjoining ward, I'd be happy to go along with it, subject to typos and corrections. But if you leave that in, then I'm not voting for anything that restricts my abilities to represent residents across the district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Beverley.
Yeah, I think at the last planning committee workshop, this was what's written here is pretty much a compromise between what was originally suggested, and what originally suggested was that only the ward member could call in the application. So, like I said, this was made as a suggestion, as a compromise to what Councillor Baxter's talking about. And at the end of the day, at the end of that meeting, we did take a vote on it. So the planning committee was in favour of the amendment as is written down.
Thank you very much indeed. Any further members wish to speak? Any further members wish to speak?
No, I'd like to ask.
I just wish to say a few words. I'm not a.
I'd like to ask a clarification from Councillor Bellamy. When the vote was taken, where will I find the record
Councillor
of that
Baxter, I
vote?
haven't called you to speak yet. Thank you. I was speaking. I'm not a member of the planning committee, But when this was explained to me, I thought it was a sensible and reasonable idea. Why should I be wanted to call in an application from a different ward that I represent? So that's my current views. Now, Councillor Baxter.
Could Councillor Bellamy or anyone else please clarify where I can find the record of the vote of the planning committee on that particular issue?
I'm looking at Emma.
Chairman, I don't think there is a record that's a formal record. It was a workshop, an informal workshop. So there was no formal record. The views of that workshop have been taken into account and drafted as part of this report to this committee for formal consideration.
That's fine. Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously not being a member of the planning committee or having attended any of the meetings that are being mentioned, I would be grateful if someone who did attend those meetings or someone with greater knowledge than me could give me a very quick explanation as to why cutting down councillor involvement, in other words, just making it ward members, why that is so significant, how it does improve the service. Because if there's what Councillor Baxter is saying, is that it actually hardly ever happens, that is a slowing of the process. I'm inclined to wonder, for instance, if a planning application is put forward for a ward that is not mine, but that planning application will affect my ward, and it could literally be the building of something that is going to take away what's happening in my ward or will affect travel into my ward, then I would like to think that I would have a reasonable way of responding. So if anyone could explain why just making it the ward councillor is going to greatly help the process, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fellows. Emmy.
Thank you, Chairman. Essentially, as ward councillors, your role is obviously to represent the local residents within your ward. I'm aware of an instance of I think it was my first planning committee actually, where we've got a decision that's going to a planning appeal at the moment, and the applicants have applied for an award of costs against the council. If I'm correct in saying, I don't think that particular application got to planning committee because of the ward councillors. I think that came from other councillors within the district. We're charged with determining applications as in the timescales that we're given. That should be done fairly quickly, and that's why we've got the 21 days, because that's the consultation period. If you read paragraph 13 in Appendix B, which talks about the process, that provides some clarity and some guidance, and there's some additional wording which is in red just to make it easy for you to see what was added from the last meeting. It clarifies that actually if you are a councillor sitting outside, it's not your ward and it's not the adjacent ward to you, there is a process. I would have discretion, and certainly the chairman of the planning committee could come and talk to me about me exercising that discretion to take any application to committee. And that's the sort of conversation that needs to be had. If there's something significant that you think is affecting your ward, but you are not strictly speaking the adjacent or that ward councillor, then that's the type of conversation you need to have with us as officers, and then we can have that discussion about taking something to planning committee. And also clarifies that if there is, if you're outside of that 21-day period and there's some additional information or there's a good reason why you were unable to call the application to committee in that 21-day consultation period, then you just need to explain that so we can take that into account and really take a pragmatic view about whether or not that's something that planning committee should be reviewing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Does that explain it to you, Councillor Fellows? Thank you. Although not a member of the committee, Helen Crawford, Chairman of the Planning Committee, has indicated that she wishes to speak. I'm prepared to allow that. So are we all in agreement? Good.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards councillors outside their ward, I would hope that they would have the courtesy to speak to the ward member where that planning application was, if there was a concern and a worry. And then with that conversation, the ward member would then bring it forward to committee and to assistant planning director. working together. Would that not work?
Respond, Councillor Baxter.
I certainly think that that's the correct way to go forward. It would be to speak to the people in the ward or the person in the ward. But if the person in the ward is either long-term ill or is foursquare against the application or already has an interest in the application, then surely it would be wrong for someone who had an interest in the application to take it to committee. Oh, but they wouldn't anyway. Yeah, I get that one.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to call Councillor Linda Wootton, the governance member for Cabinet. Councillor Wootton.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. It's not about the discussion that's going on here, but I just have some items I'd like to bring up before you bring this to a close. So does anybody else need to speak?
Members, you're not a member of the committee. Councillor Dilks, you've indicated you wish to speak. I'm quite prepared to allow you to ask one question. Are members happy with that? Yes. Councillor Dilks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak, members of the committee. This is actually the third meeting of the Constitution Committee I've come to where this item was due to be discussed. I have to say I was much better prepared at the previous two meetings when it wasn't discussed for the discussion. This meeting wasn't on my diary and I totally missed it until Councillor Baxter called me this morning and said, "Are you going?" So it's with huge frustration, I've got to say, that you know I'm where I am on it. I'm not very happy, I've got to say, with the recommendation, with the package and with the way the whole thing has been handled. I notice I welcome the fact that the chairman and the vice chairman, David, who were last week, are here. But you know, have members of the planning committee been informed today of today's meeting? I certainly wasn't informed. Forgive me if I've missed an email, but normally, and certainly at the last Constitution Committee, I did receive a notification from Democratic Services about the meeting, which is why I came. But I haven't had one about today's meeting, or I may have missed it. Forgive me if I have. But I've checked the emails and I certainly can't find one. So I find that a bit sort of disconcerting, to be honest, but we're where we are.
Councillor Dilks, can you tell me what your question is, please?
Well, I can tell you what the question is, but I thought I was allowed to speak, Mr. Chairman. It's just, this meeting seems to be very sort of antagonistic, and I just wonder why.
I'm sorry, Councillor, you're quite wrong, because I'm following the Constitution to the letter. I've
Yes.
allowed you to speak, so please go ahead.
Yeah, speak, and I'm not sure I have to ask a question. I've got some questions, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to ask them. I mean, as I say, I've got huge concerns about the way we've arrived at how we have as a council with the Kratos report. And with hindsight, I've got to say, I don't know how much money we spent on it. I'd like to ask that as a question, as a council, how much we've actually paid to Kratos over the, well, is it 2 years that we've been working quotes with them? But with hindsight, I've got to say, the committee, had it been left to the committee, in my view, could have come up with a whole lot better report and way forward themselves to improve any shortcomings that may have been identified. So I think it's been a sorry affair up to this point. I certainly, I think it was Councillor Fellows and Councillor Baxter, I do absolutely agree with them on the call-in. It seems to me to be a solution in search of a problem. I hear what Emma said about that there was one case. I think she was suggesting there has been a case that caused a problem where it wasn't a ward councillor that called in a particular item. I think that was if that is true, and I don't know which case she's alluding to, but if that's true, I think that was, you know, pretty unusual and one-off. And picking up on what the chairman of planning has said, there is already a protocol in place for when, should I wish to call in as a member of the planning committee, should I wish to call in an application to be determined by the committee, I am required to inform the ward members. Now, I've only ever called in, I believe, anything within my own ward, but there are cases where it may be appropriate to call in something from, you know, across. And whilst I accept what Emma says, that, you know, we have a responsibility to our own wards, we also have a responsibility as councillors, and this is drummed into us every training, to the whole of the district. That's a fact. So that worries me. The scheme of delegation, Mr. Chairman, I have real difficulty with it. I think there's far too much delegation to the officers in it. In my view, if members of the committee, the planning committee, want something to be heard by the committee, then it should be. And I don't think, with respect to the chairman, I don't think that it needs the chairman's or should have to have the chairman's authority for that. That's just obviously my view. Forgive me, I don't know what's now in the report before you on site visits. I was concerned about site visits. I did raise it with Emma, and you know, we had an email exchange, and I feel slightly better about site visits, I've got to say, but I do think they are important, an important part of the process. Just picking up on the, I think what the Deputy Monitoring Officer said, it wasn't a workshop, as I understood it in November, it was an informal meeting of the planning committee that took place. I was unfortunately unable to get to that meeting because of county responsibility, I believe it was, but I couldn't make the that meeting. I was really annoyed that I couldn't, but and that's why I came, and why I've come to 3 now constitution committees. And I've got to say, you know, not being properly prepared for today's meeting, I'm really annoyed, and I don't think the process has been as full as it ought to have been. I noticed, you know, there are not other members of the planning committee here, and bear in mind, anybody who thinks this is, you know, should be a sort of a rubber stamp, I'll be careful the way I say it, but, you know, a previous chairman who's no longer with us, you know, was as concerned, if not more, much more concerned than me, which is probably why he was removed as chairman. Well, I know it was why he was removed. We all know that. Can I just say one thing, if I may, on the call-in protocol that's being suggested, and it talks about this 21-day period. Kratos, at the very first meeting that we had with them, and after they'd done their recommendations, it was Steve Quartermass is his name, the planning expert who sort of was with them. We had a bit of a debate, and he actually suggested that it may be much better if the opportunity to councillors to call an item into committee was actually taken further down the process when we know or have an indication what the officer recommendation is likely to be. Because currently, if I call something in, it's sort of, I always say, subject to the officer's recommendation. But, you know, it's pretty pointless calling something in if the recommendation is as you think it ought to be from the officer. Does that make sense, David? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Yes, you could. But it was Steve Quartermass, the expert, who suggested that it would be better to So I just wonder if that could be, that particular item, you know, could be looked at, and councillors have a, you know, once we know what the officer recommendation is, would be much more sensible to then say, before, you know, before those decisions are made, you know, now you've got 21 days to call it in, or 7 days, or whatever it might be.
Councillor York, you've been speaking now for over 10 minutes, so do you wish to say any more?
No, I have finished, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry that I've gone on, but it is a huge, and as a member, I care deeply, as I know colleagues do, about planning and the protocols that we have. And I think there are some things in here that are not the best way forward. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which is why I allowed you to speak for longer than 5 minutes. Thank you, thank you. Any further questions from members? Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I echo the point about Mrs. I don't know. I'll call you Emma. I don't know how to address Mrs. Anyway, Emma. I realise that I'm here to support to represent residents in my area, but I am also here. We are also here to represent residents across the district, and both are massively important. I want to make that clear. But secondly, in the recommendations in the report on page 13 of the agenda pack, it says support the proposed amendments to the planning protocols at appendices A and B. Can someone explain protocol B, which is on page 23, is guidance. It's a local code of good practice. Where does that sit within the Constitution? Is it part of our Constitution? Is our changes to it subject to bringing it back here and back to full council within the Constitution? Or is it a code that sits outside the Constitution? In which case, not entirely sure why it's here in the first place. The deletion of 9C, I'm sorry that I missed the initial preamble, but what is the impact of deleting paragraph 9C of the Constitution, which is entitled refusing an application? Will we still have a paragraph that explains how we refuse an application? Because I'm not sure I can see it. I can't see it within Appendix A. And if we delete it from the Constitution, then we won't have any guidance on refusing an application, will we? And thirdly, it talks about sending this to full council. Yeah, that's not a question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, indeed, Councillor Baxter. Graham Watts, are you able to answer those questions at all?
Thank you, Chairman. Just in relation to the protocol, it would be my recommendation that features as part of the new Constitution as an appendix to the planning part of the procedure rules in relation to the planning committee. So just for clarity, that's what I would recommend. And this subject to approval today or support today would be a recommendation to full council for approval in May.
Thank you very much, indeed. I've now got 3 speakers. Can I go back to Councillor Linda Woodson, please?
Thank you for that, Chairman. Councillor Baxter always says that I'm get the word out in a minute. Pedantic, thank you. And pernickety. Well, I think you've beaten me to it this morning, but ordinarily, any errors that are picked up, I would like to speak to the democratic officer beforehand, but I hope that you will bear with me, Chairman, because I just can't help it, because if I see something, I have to mention it. And it's on page 14, 1.5. It's just grammatical things, really. The 4th line down, it says there should be clear guidance within the protocol setting out that. I think that needs to come out. And it goes on how these decisions are reached. And on the next line, and it says, and that decision should be taken at committee. And I think it should be what decision should be taken at committee. And at 2.2, It reads, the portfolio holder for planning and planning policy was involved throughout the process of drafting the proposed amendments and protocols and have had, I think the word should be has had significant input. And also members have picked up some other things, and I'm questioning it too, because on page 27, at item 10, public speaking at meetings, it mentions Article 9. Now, those members that have been going through the process of the review would have an understanding that we won't in the future have an Article 9. Perhaps the democratic officer could confirm that for me, because we're going to, I believe, have 7 articles. So that takes me back to page 13, as Councillor Baxter's already pointed out, endorses the deletion of Article 9C in the Constitution. We have Articles 9, but I couldn't actually see a C. So I think Councillor Baxter's beaten me to it, if he could see 9C in the current Constitution. And other than that, I've heard members talking about planning site visits. On page 15, it just says in the financial implications, there will be no direct financial implications arising from the implementation of the stated protocols as they relate to procedural matters. Councillors' expenses may reduce because of fewer individual site visits and favour towards committee site visits. What does that mean, please? And if you just bear with me, Chairman, I think the planning committee members understand planning a lot more than a lot of us, because a lot of us shy away from such things. And I would just like to thank them for the work that they have done. Sadly, perhaps the Constitution Committee members could have been invited to some of those meetings, and perhaps we would have had a bigger understanding. But and just bear with me. 1.3 on page 14. I don't know if it slipped off the page. A, the last word even should be dealt, not deal. And that's it from me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Linda Wootton. There are quite a few points there. Can you help me on those, Graham, particularly the 9C in recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will ask Emma Whitaker to come in relation to explaining the removal of, well, suggested removal of the article. We've always been conscious that the constitution review and the planning review would be separate reviews, although obviously they are going to tie into each other. Anything that's approved in relation to proposals following the planning review will be picked up as part of the constitution, so they will automatically be fed into the constitution. So at the moment we do have a paragraph 9C which relates to the refusal of planning application. So it's right that we have a recommendation today in that respect, but the detail behind that I will ask Emma Whitaker to respond to. Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. So Article 9C in the current constitution is, as Graham's already said, is specifically about refusing an application. And it says that the committee should only have delegated power to refuse the application against the clearly expressed advice from the assistant director if it's acted in accordance with the following. It's obviously about putting a motion forward and seconded, but there's also something called a cooling off period whereby members would have had 5 days to put their reasons in to myself as the assistant director to then bring a paper back to planning committee. This was something that was just highlighted by the Creators Review as highly irregular and not something which is at all good practice. It exposes the council to appeals against non-determination, and really decisions should be made there and then at planning committee, unless the decision is obviously to defer for insufficient, because you've got insufficient information, so you want more information brought back to planning committee. So it is proposed to delete it. It doesn't mean that the planning committee cannot make a decision to refuse. To the contrary, they can, they're empowered. It just means that they need to make a decision on the day, really, rather than have this unorthodox cooling off period. What we've put into the protocol instead is a bit of guidance around what that looks like in terms of that making that decision. Otherwise, the committee was very much bound to not being able to make or very hampered in terms of making a decision there and then. So hopefully that just clarifies that it's not, as I think it was sort of feared, taking away from the committee's ability to refuse an application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Next speaker is Councillor Paul Fellows.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the point at which I assume a lot of the discussion started was about taking away the ability to all councillors to be able to call in any planning application. I'm really in between a cleft stick, because there's a piece of me that totally understands the logic of it to make it smooth and effective. But there is also a piece of me, for instance, if I can cite an example, there was a planning application that ended up getting rejected for the destruction of a bridge in my ward. And all the councillors who called it in and made that happen, not one took the courtesy of talking to myself about it at all. So there's elements of me thinking, if it's in your ward, you should have the best knowledge for it. I think where I'm at with it now is the way that this will be received by the council as a whole. And I would like to assume that the planning committee are going to want to support it. I would like to think that the whole of the council is ready to support it. I'm inclined to think that they may not, which in case, if we then today pass this into the constitution, we as a committee then have to go to general council absolutely certain that we think this is the way forward and prepared to place those arguments. I actually feel that there will be a lot of contrary arguments and discussion for it, and that's what's given me a problem.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Fellows. Councillor Bellamy.
Yeah, just to clarify something that Councillor Fellows has just said, that application with the bridge went to committee because it was a major application and it wasn't a call-in. So it was a little, it was a little bit different to just something about what Emma said as well, just for clarification, that cooling off period generally was only used as literally like that during COVID. And that was because there wasn't the opportunity to put down in writing at the meeting the reasons for refusal. The cooling off period to that was there, but there was always written reasons given actually at the meeting. And then it was just confirmed after the cooling off period. Basically, it just gave, the committee chance to change their mind rather than to add all the reasons for refusing it. Like I say, the way it worked was you actually gave the whoever was in Emma's job at the time the reason in writing at the meeting. So it weren't as though we was refusing it, then going away, then making up some sort of story to get it refused afterwards. That weren't the way it worked. Just something about what Phil said as well. If you look at the site visits, which is on page 31, actually this goes further than what already existed, because at the minute, whoever's in Emma's position, Assistant Director of Planning and the Chairman and the officers, they decide what the, as far as I'm aware, they decide on the site visits at the minute. So this is putting in something extra whereby a ward member or a member of the planning committee can request. So it's putting, to be honest, if we asked, we'd probably get it anyway, but at least this puts in formally. So like I say, it is actually adding something that wasn't in there, to my knowledge, in the first place.
I've now got another member of the committee to speak, Councillor Susan Sandal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern was the deletion of Article 9C, because I wanted to know why. I wasn't happy about voting for something which I wasn't concerned, know what the reason behind the deletion, but the lady has given us that explanation. The other thing is, I am not involved with planning whatsoever, other than I understood that the ward council had to call in if there was any concerns. Is the chairman of planning happy with this? And should all the other planning members be consulted, because they have perhaps better knowledge and certainly than I have? So I wouldn't want to vote on something without knowing that other people are happy with the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sandor. I was actually going to ask to call Chairman of Planning. So do we all agree that she's allowed to speak again? Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would hope that between myself and Emma, with common sense and planning rules and regulations, that we would have a good reason why an application should be brought to committee. You know, you can't bring it just because you don't like it. It's got to have material planning considerations as to why. And that would be the reason why it would come to committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've had a good discussion now for an hour. I'm going to call one more speaker. Are we all in agreement that Councillor Mark Whittington is allowed to speak as a non-member of the committee? Yeah, good. Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak. Again, as I mentioned earlier, as the then chairman of this committee, I did attend. I wasn't able to attend the first workshop the planning committee had with the officers to discuss this, but I watched it subsequently via the YouTube channel. I was able to attend the second meeting in person and to observe it. And the issues that have been raised around call-in and who should call in, and around site visits, and around giving reasons for perhaps turning applications down, all of these matters we're discussing in considerable detail at both of those meetings, which involved members of the planning committee with officers. And as a result of the discussions at the first meeting, a number of changes were made to the documentation for the second meeting, which I'm sure that Emma and Councillor Crawford could confirm that this happened. So from my perspective, as I say, observing this process, it did go through a proper scrutiny process that involved all members of the planning committee. And also at the meeting, both meetings, there were other non-planning committee members who were in attendance and who made contributions as well. So the meetings were widely advertised. It was open to any councillor to attend. And as I said, certainly my observations were all of these items were discussed in considerable detail at both of the meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to close the debate. I'm going to refer you to page 13 of the agenda. And the recommendations are: 1, that you support the proposed amendments to the planning protocols at appendices A and B. 2, endorse the deletion of Article 9C in the Constitution. And 3, supports as part of the overall review of the Constitution recommendations 1 and 2 being presented to the Council for further consideration in May 2022. I move that that's proposed. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. All those in favour?
Sorry, I'd like to propose an amendment, please.
Can we just continue with this first?
Yeah, you can't take a vote on something you
Could I
have
have your
proposed an
written,
amendment.
could I have your written amendment, please?
Where does it say in the Constitution that I need to write down an amendment at this
I'm
meeting?
requesting one.
Could someone supply me a piece of plain paper?
There's an amendment now. Councillor Baxter has proposed an amendment which reads in Appendix A, delete in 2.2 brackets 1 from that ward or the adjoining ward. Councillor Baxter, do you have a seconder?
I request a seconder because this is the contentious part. It's just
Do you have a seconder for your amendment?
I don't know if I've got a second. Apparently I do, yes.
Seconded by Councillor Paul Fellows. Therefore, we will go to the vote. Unless you wish to speak. Yes, certainly, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm more than prepared to second Ashley's amendment because I actually think this is the nub of which I would love the answer from my colleagues. If we vote for this amendment, then that obviously means that we are content to go forwards and allow General Council to vote yes or no on it. So I'm proposing the amendment just so as I can gauge where the committee is.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish to speak on the amendment? Councillor David Bellamy.
Could we just clarify where the amendment is, please, and where it sits in the document? Like I say, 'cause I'm not sure. So.
I'm just trying to find out. Councillor Baxter, can you give me the page, please?
Chair, if I might help, I think it is customary if someone proposes an amendment to allow them to speak to the amendment, and that might help. Thank you. We're talking about the bottom of page 19. At the top of the page, it says Appendix A. On the left-hand side, there are numbers, and that 2.2 is the paragraph number, and then there's another paragraph number inside the margin, which the paragraph starts in respect of any particular ward. Are we all on the same page? Okay. The words that I'm proposing to delete are, in the third line down, consent, where a councillor from that ward or the adjoining ward has requested. I'm suggesting that we should just have where a councillor has requested. So we take out, what we're doing basically is saying that any councillor can call in any application from anywhere, which they hardly ever do. The only one that I can think of is when ages ago, probably 4 years ago, I called in the suggestion to erect a statue in St Peter's Hill, and that was certainly in the public interest. There may have been other ones, but I looked through the list and hardly anyone ever called. Very few people have called in more than 2 applications anywhere. So it really is, as Councillor Dilk said, a solution in search of a problem. So we are deleting from that ward or the adjoining ward.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Bellamy.
Well, my point is that you can't change that without changing the Appendix B as well. So, like I say, it's just sort of throwing it all back up in the air, if you like. But...
Thank you. Any further speakers on the amendment? If not, we'll go to the votes. So it's been proposed by Councillor Baxter on page 19 to delete in 2.2 from that ward or the adjoining ward. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 2. All those against? That's lost. So go back to the original proposal, which has been proposed. It's been proposed and seconded. So that is that 1 supports the proposed amendments to planning protocols in Appendix A and B. 2 endorses the deletion of Article 9C in the Constitution. And 3 supports, as part of the overall review of the Constitution, recommendations 1 and 2 being presented to the Council and further consideration in May 2002. That's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. For any against? So that's now been, any abstention? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, that's been carried.
Could you please record my my vote?
Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 6. It's articles of the Constitution 2 and 3. Hand over to Graham Watts to speak on this.
Thank you, Chairman. So this brings before the committee Articles 1 and 2 of the new proposed constitution. These articles were brought to the last meeting, and further to which a number of workshops have been held with members. Some useful feedback, nothing substantial in terms of the content of the proposed articles, but mainly tidying things up, making them read better, typographical errors and that kind of thing. So the documents before committee today are effectively a clean version of those documents. You've had all the mapping and working documents already at this committee, so that this is effectively the two appendices that I'm asking for recommendation to full council for approval. There are a couple of minor tweaks that have been identified since publishing the papers, one of which is on page 38, where I refer to 20 articles when actually we've got 18 listed. That's because we've amalgamated 2 of them to make them easier to read. But that's obviously not been updated, so I'll make sure that that's amended. Also on page 62, we're talking about companies committee. I've referred to the Constitution Committee in the opening paragraph, so obviously I'll make sure that's amended. And then also on page 64, there's an abbreviation of JNC, and for clarity, I'll make sure that that's set out in full. It's the Joint Negotiating Committee, but again, for clarity and ease of use, I'll make sure that that's out there.
Thank you very much. Can I just refer you to page 39? It was third paragraph where it says council meetings or full council. It says are normally open to the public. Should not say open to the public. Take normally out.
There may be some occasions, Chairman, where there is an item that's at an extraordinary meeting whereby there'd be exempt information. So I think that's just to cover us in terms of where we may have to hold a meeting in its entirety in private session. So that just covers us for that circumstance.
Thank you very much. And also on the agenda item 6, the agenda, we're talking about part 4. You're talking about calling for a further meeting, which I understand will be 9th of May, and a workshop as well. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So part 4 of the Constitution is quite got quite a few complex documents as part of it. They are the procedure rules for the authority. So the first workshop that I've set up, I think it's on the 4th of May. Information has gone out to all members of the council to invite them to one of 3 workshops on that day. If you're unable to attend, then obviously I'm more than happy to meet with any member to go through the proposed documents. But those documents at that workshop will be the council procedure rules, access to information procedure rules, and the budget and policy framework procedure rules. The same documentation and mapping has been applied to those documents to show where those amendments have been made, where things have been retained, and where things are being proposed for deletion. So hopefully members still continue to find that useful. And not to overburden that particular workshop, I'm going to set up another workshop which will look at the remaining procedure rules, which are the executive procedure rules, overview and scrutiny procedure rules, and the employment procedure rules. Again, quite complex documents, and I want to ensure members have given them proper consideration prior to making any recommendations to full council. Just in relation to the remaining parts of the Constitution, part 5 is essentially all of our codes and protocols, things like the Code of Conduct and the Member Officer Protocol and the Officer Code of Conduct. They're in themselves are standalone documents that I think can just be effectively placed into the new format of the document. So I wasn't proposing to hold any workshops or engagement activity on those particular documents, because I think certainly the Code of Conduct for members is very recently been adopted already. So I didn't see any need to bring those before members, but again, happy to do that if the committee wishes me to. Part 6 is the members' allowances scheme. That's in the process of being reviewed by the Independent Remuneration Panel, and the report from the Independent Remuneration Panel will be presented to full council in May at the same time as the Constitution. So it's very good timing, and that will effectively then form part of the Constitution. And the remaining part of the document is the management structure, which again is a factual document which we will ensure is placed in the Constitution. So after the part 4 workshops and a further committee meeting, we should be in a position where we've got a new version of the Constitution that's ready for full council to consider and hopefully approve in May. Thanks, Chairman.
Somebody's phone going. Right, thank you. So we're looking at the Constitution Part 1 and 2 today. So I've got 2 members now for questions. Any questions? Councillor Baxter?
Thank you. I welcome the, oh, sorry. I'll happily give way to Councillor Sandal.
Councillor Sandal, yeah, apologies. for that.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. I've just got a couple of queries, if I may. On page 39, how the council operates, the 3rd paragraph, full council appoint a leader who chairs meetings of the cabinet, and the full council also appoints councillors to sit on committees and outside bodies. Is it mandatory, not mandatory, for somebody to stand on at least one council and one committee?
I can't
It
answer
doesn't
that
say
question.
Chairman, I can answer that for you. No, there's no requirement for a council to sit on a committee, and if you're applying the political balance rules, then there may be occasions where independent councillors who aren't part of a political group, wouldn't be able to sit on committees unless a seat was gifted to them. So there's no requirement for a council to sit on any committee.
That's correct. Otherwise, one of our council members, I think Councillor Ian Selby, wasn't a member of any committee until recently.
That was because of his political alignment, wasn't it? It wasn't through choice. I
I'm
thought
not sure.
everybody had to be on at least one committee, but that's okay. There's just one other thing I wanted to query. Cabinet members cannot be on overview and scrutiny committee meetings, and it does state that here. But I understood recently the chairman of the Constitution had stepped down because he's now a cabinet member, and I was told you cannot be on a committee if you're a cabinet member. But when you go further down in the Constitution, it doesn't state that against the other committees. And I think if it says it for one, it should say it for all of them.
Yes,
If that's the
yes,
case.
you're right.
Thank you.
There. So what page are we looking at, Councillor Sandal?
Well, 53 is where the membership of the overview and scrutiny committees, it states in 6.2.
Yeah.
But then when you go to other cabinet, other committees, it doesn't say. Okay. The Constitution, it just says the Constitution Committee will comply with the political balance in the rule section 15. And it will have no fewer than 7 committees. It does not say that a cabinet member can't be part of it. And I think, and that applies further down to the others as well.
Thank you for that question. I'll pass it on to Graham Watts. Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there's in legislation, it makes it clear that if you're a cabinet member, you can't be part of an overview and scrutiny committee. There is nothing to prevent a cabinet member, especially in relation to our constitution as it currently stands, or in the legislation, to prevent a cabinet member being part of a regulatory committee, even governance and audit committee, planning committee, constitution committee. There's nothing to prevent that happening. So when a certain cabinet member was appointed as a cabinet member recently, that would have been a personal choice as to what they wanted to do in terms of continuing a membership or chairmanship of a committee, concentrating on being a cabinet member. But there's nothing to prevent that happening, which is why it just prescribes overview and scrutiny committees in terms of that restriction.
Thank you for that clarification. Are you happy with that, Councillor Sandal? Yeah. Back to Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. That's exactly the point that I made at full council. Even though cabinet members tried to tell me I was incorrect, I'm pleased to hear that I was correct. That it did require the resignation of the previous chair of the Constitution Committee to take place before we could appoint a new chair of Constitution Committee. My question is about the recommendation, and before saying that, I do thank Mr. Watts and his colleagues for the consultation that we've had around this, and I certainly feel like I've had a good go at it at the various meetings and workshops and briefings and Zoom meetings and everything else. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time criticising the content. However, the recommendation is to note the progress. Yes, definitely want to note the progress and welcome it, but to recommend parts 1 and 2 to full council for approval. I don't think we can do that unless it is subject to the successful resolution of part 4, because parts 1 and 2 cannot stand on their own. They keep referring to what's in part 4. I'm grateful for the paper copies of part 4 that I've had today. I think most councillors received them middle of last week. If there is a shocking problem with part 4 that means we can't resolve it, then I don't want to recommend parts 1 and 2 because they don't make any sense. So I don't know what to do with that. Probably that's to add a parentheses after recommendation 2 to say along with parts 4, etc. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers? You're not a member of the committee, but I'll allow you to speak again.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee members. I just know 7.4 deputy leader will exercise all functions of the leader of the council in his or her absence. Perhaps for our LGBTQ plus, it should just read there instead of he or she.
I think you made a valid point there. So can we change that, Graham?
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, and that's another example of something that needs to change throughout the whole document. So again, we'll make sure that that happens as well. Thank you. And just in response to Councillor Baxter's comments, if the committee's happier, we can it's quite possible to defer this for when part 4 comes before the committee. It's all going to the same meeting of council, so it wouldn't affect any timescale in that respect.
Yes, that's what I thought. Proposal is from myself. Recommendation from Graham is to defer this item until the 9th of May, so that we can then recommend the part 1, part 2, and part 4 go to council. I'm proposing that. Are we happy yet? Yes, good. Good, that's passed. So with that, I have no further business. So at 5 to 12, I close this meeting and thank you for attending. The next meeting will be on the 9th of May.